Hello and welcome to another episode of The Lancet Voice. I'm Taissa Vila, the Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Regional Health Americas, part of the Lancet family of journals. It's the 200-year anniversary for the Lancet, and as part of our celebrations, we're shining a light on multiple areas of health. This podcast is focused on research for health, specifically the gap between knowledge and action, and how we can ensure that evidence is used by policymakers in their decisions. Today, we have a very special guest who's been involved in multiple areas of this translational process. I have the pleasure to talk to Ana Claudia de Souza, who is a Brazilian stroke neurologist and works in assistance to neurology patients, but also coordinating and managing clinical research projects at Hospital Moinhos de Vento in Porto Alegre in Brazil, where she is located. Ana Claudia, thank you very much for being with me today here. And I'll jump right into our discussion. So I invited Ana Claudia to this conversation because among many of her projects, she was involved in a landmark trial that represents quite nicely the idea of translating evidence to practice, and how this simple ask can have many different layers depending on the setting. Ana is one of the medical scientists involved in the Resilient trial, which aimed to show that the feasibility of a well-established procedure for stroke patients that had been only studied in high-income settings. So Ana, my first topic to you is, can you talk to us a little bit about the context in which the Resilient trial was designed and why it was such an important research question at that point?
So thank you so much, Taissa, for your invitation. And it's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about the Resilient. The Resilient trial was ideally built through a group of neurologists. Dr. Raul Nogueira from United States, he's one of the big heads that created the methodology of the trial. And also here in Brazil, another principal investigator, Professor Sheila Martins, that is from the same city that I came. They built this study mainly because when they tried to incorporate this technology, the mechanical thrombectomy, inside of our public health system, the government asked us, but it is very expensive, and will it really work in the public health system? Will it be feasible? And will it be cost effective to incorporate such a technology? So they take into all those questions into the methodology. And the main objective of this trial was to prove that it could still benefit our population in our setting. Because we know we have a lack of infrastructure, and we know that mainly we don't have so many professionals that could perform those kind of procedures. And also we have another problem here. In Brazil, the research is in a middle stage. So not all of the hospitals had good research centers well established. So the study was really challenging because we put small and also comprehensive stroke centers to perform this study. So it was a huge challenge that started with 20 hospitals, and in the primary phase, what they did in those hospitals, running phase. So all the neurointerventionalists were training to perform the trial. Dr. Raul Nogueira came here in Brazil to teach all those doctors to perform the procedure. Also, Dr. Sheila Martins, she traveled all over states that participated to train them regarding the protocol and to stand with the right GCP's procedures to perform the trial. So it was a beautiful history because in that context, for example, in 2015, we had 5 main trials that proved the efficacy of mechanical thrombectomy in a setting that is developed countries. So the context is completely different. This procedure is really important because 1/3 of stroke patients, they have a severe type of stroke that we call large vessel occlusions. So only with a medication that is called intravenous alteplase, sometimes the clots cannot be dissolved. So you must perform also a complementary procedure that is like a catheterism, but for the vessels of the brain. So the mechanical thrombectomy, they proved this benefit in 2015. And we know that here, for the stroke treatment in our country, it took 17 years to approve one medication that is for all kind of types of ischemic stroke. It is called alteplase. So it took 17 years to be incorporated. And we wanted that this could not happen anymore. So because of this, this group of neurologists, they run and try to perform the resilient trial to understand the results and perform a cost-effectiveness study to incorporate into our public health system.
Well, 17 years, yeah. If we wait 17 years between every advance to make it incorporate. And you touched on a point that is very important, and we can discuss this. It's generally, this is the bottleneck, we call. So you want to incorporate something in the lower and middle income countries, and you have several bottlenecks. But one, and a very important one, and you mentioned, is not having enough trained physicians or trained personnel all around, or having like very specific hospitals where people should go to get that procedure, and that's not visible. So having in the trial incorporated the training of others, that was part of your cost-effectiveness study, I'm assuming, right? How do you see the acceptance of that, and how challenging was that for a country as big as Brazil, I'm thinking?
Yeah, it was very challenging because, the neurointerventionalists from all centers, they had to be there on call 24 hours because of the resilient trial, and they were there not receiving to perform the procedures because it was a resilient trial. It was with love for the patients. But when we assume this cost, for example, we did for how much is a salary for a neurointerventionalist? How much time does the interventionalist spend in the angio suite? And how much is the devices for example, to simulate how much does the procedure costs? So we achieved, for example, in some hospitals that we had these numbers, the hour of a neurointerventionalist, the total costs of other materials used, and the total cost of the hours that the patient is spending in angio suite. Then we made, for example, an example that we applied for all centers to simulate the cost of the total procedure with the devices updated and other costs.
I assume that this was one of the most important parts of your study, given that it was almost a commissioned, as I understand, trial from your government to say, well, we won't implement this unless you show me it's relevant to our setting and it's doable in our setting. So this speaks a lot to cost-effectiveness trials and parts of trials or specific trials, and also to the importance of being careful in the translation of evidence from other settings. So another curiosity that I have is, we know it was a successful trial, and we know that you showed the procedure was still feasible in your public health system. But have you actually identified any different outcomes compared to the other population that this has been studied before?
Yes. Unfortunately, we found that our patients, they had higher mortality rates because of the severity of their previous conditions. For example, hypertension, diabetes, they had this for a long time, and the consequences of those chronic disease like heart failure, like past strokes. So those patients, when they came to us, they were really in a severe condition. And mainly if we can, for example, see the disparities of the results, and we can think about the reasons why, maybe because of the primary and secondary prevention that still is far from the ideal here in our country. So this reflected in our outcomes. So our patients were in a more severe state, and also they died more than compared to the other countries. But it was in the both arms, so it was not related to the procedure, and a very different result from what we saw in the developed countries.
This also speaks to what we were saying about the importance of the regulators asking you for this trial. So it might be, we look at this and like, well, there's so much evidence around, and can we just take this and incorporate? But the importance of having a contextualized research showing that this is still actually needed for that specific population. And I wonder how do you see this resonating around? And did you see an impact after the trial in other countries in Latin America? Did you see this spread as being incorporated in other systems?
Yes, definitely. I think that to prove that mechanical thrombectomy really worked in an upper middle income country is an example for other countries that still don't have the mechanical thrombectomy implemented. So this is a really difficult balancing. We know that here in public health systems, we deal with constraints, with funding constraints. So we have to try to allocate resources. And we understand why they asked us this kind of study. And here in Latin America, we have the same scenario. So performing this and also showing that it is cost effective for a disease that is the first cause of mortality in our country was really an example. We have here in Latin America lots of initiatives to implement mechanical thrombectomy. For example, we have one that is the certification of stroke centers that is endorsed by the World Stroke Organization and also the Ibero-American Society of Vascular Neurology, that is helping to certify and to improve the treatment care in those hospitals. And also we have programs endorsed by the World Stroke Organization that is helping the countries. For example, we have in Colombia recently a course that neurointerventionalists from United States are there to teach them how to perform the procedure. And also we have other projects. I have one project that is analyzing the costs, the real costs of the ischemic stroke and their impact. And through this kind of study, we can see if the technologies could be cost effective, and after that to be incorporated in those different kind of settings that we have here in Latin America. Also, the same initiative, for example, is being extended to Egypt, is being extended to India. So right now, we are having a conference in India, a Global Stroke Alliance with Southeast Asia countries to discuss about how to implement policies for a better stroke treatment and how to implement those evidence-based treatments. So it's a balance. Each country has its particularities. So we have to be resilient. We have to adapt ourselves. So the name of the trial was really resilient, and it has a purpose. So all of the people involved were resilient to achieve these results into our public system. And right now, this study is an example to translate it into practice and action for the stroke patients.
That's wonderful. It's amazing to see it spreading like this, and in relatively shorter than 17 years for sure. And yeah, I have a point that you also touched, and I know that we're just all this time saying that Resilient was successful an example, because we both know that it was eventually approved to be incorporated in the Brazilian public health system back in 2021. But I also know that this was not the end of the story, and it's actually pretty much almost the beginning of the story. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happens after you have the evidence and you go to them and say, okay, here's the evidence and it's contextualized. Now do it.
Yeah. Now it's something that we call, for example, advocacy. We showed the results, we incorporated the technology, but we must address other kind of things. For example, how will be the funding released for those hospitals, because a national policy for a national stroke plan should be rewritten, and we must create codes for the hospitals to be reimbursed. It's a long procedure to incorporate a new technology. It's not reimbursed, and still the funding was not released. So recently we had a meeting in Brasilia, and representatives from our National Stroke Society were there to talk about what is a stroke and our huge social and economic impact that we have here, and the importance to incorporate the technology. So we achieved good results. Also, it was cost effective. Also, we incorporated, but still we don't have the funding. It's a procedure. So we are not just scientists. We have to adapt ourselves. We have to talk with different kind of sponsors. We have to try to talk to the Ministry of Health to show our results and to show the importance of the disease. So this is such a kind of implementing science of our evidences, of our results. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of resilience too. And now we expect that until the end of the year, we will have this release, and then the hospitals that performed the mechanical thrombectomy for the Resilient and also are certified could perform the procedure. So it's still a long way until we can afford the treatment in the public health system for our patients.
It's tricky because if we think about scientists and doctors, we're not trained to do that part of the job, right? So you get to the end of the trial and you think the evidence will so fit, but then you learn that you have to play multiple roles and learn new skills to talk to policymakers, talk to parliamentarians, and the language that you need to use to convince them is different than the language that we use to convince scientists, right? It's tricky, and it's a lot related to having the society involved. So you mentioned it as an implementation phase of this. And do you see the civil society and the patient societies playing an important part of this? Have you had any experience working with patient societies on that phase?
Definitely. It's very important. We have some patient societies here in Brazil for stroke patients. And for example, they really do the advocacy for the stroke patients. They help them, for example, to facilitate access to rehabilitation. That is another problem here in our country. And also they play a huge role in participating, for example, in the Stroke Day. In the 29th October is the World Stroke Day. So during this week, all of vascular neurologists, stroke neurologists, and also the stroke associations, they participate together. They for example, they explain what is a stroke for the population. They go to the parks and they measure blood pressure. They talk to the patients. They evaluate the risk factors. They gave a lot of education lectures to raise awareness of stroke. So we are also engaged on this. We have, especially here, the efforts from the Brazilian Stroke Research Network that is leading all the campaigns that happened all over the years. So definitely it's very important to work in all levels of science, and with education and primary prevention, secondary prevention, rehabilitation, and acute hospital phase. So we have to balance it again and not forget any part of it.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes you gotta speak to the heart, and that's why sometimes I feel like the patient societies, they are really convincing for the policymakers, because they seem more relatable than the scientists explaining why that procedure is so great. So that's why having the interface of all levels is quite touching sometimes. And well, if that's what it takes. I have one point that I might have missed during our conversation, but we talked about many initiatives that are happening, and some of them are a result of the Resilient. But I also know that the trial itself gave birth to other little projects. Do you want to talk to us about them and how they relate to our conversation today?
Yes, we have the continuum of the Resilient trial. The first is the Resilient Extend, that is mechanical thrombectomy for patients that came into the hospital over 8 hours from symptom onset until 24 hours. So this study already is stopping for the first interim analysis to analyze the results, if it's a benefit or not. And also we have the Resilient Extend IV that is testing another drug that is called tenecteplase in the extended window until 9 hours. And we have another trial that is the Resilient Direct TNK that is testing the TNK in the mechanical thrombectomy. So the same centers and adding more centers that wanted to participate because of the great movement of the Resilient trial are performing mainly those two last trials, because the Resilient Extend already reached our pre-specified number for the first interim analysis, and it's possible that it will stop or not, let's see. So it's really a good achievement for our stroke research team here in Brazil to keep continuing those trials and the energy.
And this speaks to another point that's very important, because although we've been focusing on the specific trial or the specific project that you are very related to, this has a bigger impact that we can see in your previous message. That is, when one thing starts to work, it creates this chain of events. So you start showing to physicians in other departments and other researchers that it's possible. So they either want to participate in your next trial, or you create this movement of growing the local research. Do you see this around you already? How do you see this happening?
No, that's definitely we can see this, and we have the Brazilian stroke network for the research that is always growing. So I can see their eyes. They are always trying to learn more and to participate. They keep contacting us. Oh, now I have an ethics committee. How can I start here? Can we participate? So we send a feasibility for those centers, and we evaluate and we work together. We train them if they are really willing to be there. It has been a good experience. I think that it's growing, and it's like you said, it's possible. It can be possible, and we can achieve great results. Not only, for example, a positive result in a trial, but the power of this great network. So definitely, it's good.
So there is one aspect of implementation that also plays an important role, and you may see this happening around, is the cultural and acceptance of novelties from the community and from the patients as well. Is there any remarkable points around this that you've noticed about implementing something new and participating in the trial and talking to the patients about them being in the trial and that part of the translation?
That it's tricky because, for example, when you are in a emergency situation, for example, you are having a ischemic stroke and there is this acute phase trial, mainly the acceptance is higher. So we train, for example, the physicians that are evaluating the patients to explain everything for the patient, but always to reassure the benefit, the potential benefit. So another tricky point is that we have to talk their language. So we have to adapt ourselves. We sometimes when you are starting research, you use the technical words, and you don't engage your potential participant, and you just lost it. But you have to adapt your language. You have to explain all the procedures, and after that, mainly for the outpatient clinic phase trials, we have to have some strategies to retain those participants. So we are trying to train everyone how to do this, because it's not including participants and not showing. You have to adapt your language. As you said, we have to improve our skills in different levels.
No, absolutely. I find the very, very important part is to reassure to the patient that being clear of the risks, but also be talking in their language, because in the end, it's for their benefit that we're doing this, and it must be the patient in the first place. So I find it an important skill.
And we had a great acceptability of our patients, because mainly it's a public health system, and we were offering this, but that they potentially could receive a treatment that could change their lives. So they were really, I want to participate. So it's the acceptance was higher, and even for the resilient Extend IV and also the resilient Direct TNK, the acceptability is not a problem, but always the communication issues could be a problem. You have to to explain things for the patients in their language, the benefits and the risks.
I wonder if when you talk to other people that experience very different health system situations where public health system is not universal like it is in Brazil, and if this is their main challenge, for example, in such implementations.
That it's always an enrichment for both parts, because if we understand each context, each reality, each cultural differences, the social disparities involved, and you try to really understand, we can build better plans to address those problems, to create better national policies for the stroke patients. And also, when we are trying to, here in India, we are performing the Global Stroke Alliance, and it's not only a scientific conference. We are involving the ministers, we are involving the medical society, we are involving the other stakeholders to work together, always together, to implement all the evidence-based strategies for stroke care. So it's a group, it's a team work for performing this.
Yes, it's a beautiful teamwork. Well, I think this is a very nice way to finish our talk. And I'll thank you once again, Ana, for your participation and your amazing remarks. I learned a lot about Stroke Alliance and stroke care, and I hope you had a great time.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of The Lancet Voice. This podcast will be marking the Lancet's 200th anniversary throughout 2023 by focusing on the spotlights with lots of different guest hosts from across the Lancet group. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you back here soon. Thanks so much for listening.